All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Rani Batra, and I'm the Education Services Manager here at the Inn. Before we start, I'm going to briefly run through the arrangements for this evening's session. The Inn's library staff are going to speak for about 45 minutes. Please direct all questions using the Q&A function so the speakers and hosts can see your questions clearly. If you are having problems with your connection or want to leave any feedback, you can do so in the chat function. If you drop out of the meeting due to internet or connection issues, you will be asked to sign back in as soon as possible using the details. Once the webinar is finished, you are free to leave the Zoom. We will record your attendance using the Zoom's built-in report, which lists all the attendees, including how long you attended the session. The accreditation is not an automated process, and the registers and reports have to be carefully checked before a QS can be awarded. So please bear with us whilst this gets done. I'm now going to hand you over to our speakers, Carolyn and Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Welcome this evening to everyone to our session on legal research training. My name's Carolyn Rampling, and I'm one of the assistant librarians in the library. I will be taking you through the first half of this session, and then I'll hand over to my colleague, Mark Leonard, the other assistant librarian, and he will be taking you through the second half. So the session, we will be looking at the best practice for using legal research with specific reference to the materials and services available at Lincoln's Inn Library. And then we're going to be looking at advanced use of electronic and hard copy case and legislation resources. But really, the aims of the session tonight are to give you some tips and guidance on legal research skills that will not only be useful to you as students, but will also set you up for your future career, which will include a lot of legal research. Really, legal research is the foundation for much of your work, so hopefully Mark and I will be able to advise you on the best way to conduct research by showing you how to take advantage of the library's vast collection of hard copy resources, and also how best to search the electronic sources that are available in the library. I'm going to start with some very general information about the library and its collection. For those of you who have not been in the library yet, I do encourage you to come in and have a look. We are open at the moment, and we are hoping to stay open for this next month of lockdown. At the moment, our library opening hours are Monday through Thursday, 9 to 7, and Friday, 9 to 6. We also open in a rota system on Saturdays with the other Inn libraries. To see which Inn libraries open on a Saturday, have a look at our opening hours page on the website under the Library and Archives. If there's any changes to this, we will post the changes on the opening hours page. We will also post any changes to our opening hours via our social media channels, so Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So all of the Inn libraries have a full collection of English legal materials. In addition, each Inn library has their own specialisms. We have chancery practice, parliamentary materials, and we share Commonwealth collection with Intertemple Library. There may be times one of the other Inn libraries has the material that you need. As members of Lincoln's Inn, you are allowed to use any of the Inn libraries. So if the material is at Intertemple, Middle Temple, or Gray's Inn, you are welcome to go to the library and use it there. We are primarily reference libraries, so lending is very, very strict. There's hardly any lending, so most of the material will actually need to be used in the library themselves. The main finding aids are our electronic library catalog, and also we have a pink quick reference guide which lists all of our current textbooks by subject. The majority of the textbooks is in our textbook bay. Now our textbook bay starts at shelf 91 and it continues into the following bays alphabetically by author. There are also desks in the main bays, on the main floor in the bays, that are numbered by Roman numerals, as you can see on the slide here. Now to find materials, fortunately, our library catalog no longer looks like this. Our library catalog is now available to search online from anywhere. So if you are looking for material, simply go to your favorite search engine and type Lincoln's Inn Library Catalog, and you can search the library catalog, the same version that Mark and I see in the library. This is the main search screen for the catalog. Now, something to note is that the libraries very rarely throw anything away, so we have an extensive collection of old editions. So if you are wanting to search for a particular item, whether it's a current textbook or an old edition, this is the main search screen that you will see. So you see here on the left-hand side is some drop-down menus, so you can kind of mix and match what you want to search for by subject, by title, by author. If you already know the title of the book that you're searching, go ahead and plug it into the title field there. So let's say, for example, Snell's Equity. Now, any textbook that we have old editions for, you will find 2 results on your results list from doing a search of the catalog. So searching for Snell's Equity, you will get 2 results like this. The top result will be the most current edition, and the second result will be the record for the old editions. If you want to see which old editions we have, you click on the hypertext link there. And about halfway down the page, under Lincoln's Inn Notes, is a list of all the earlier editions that are held and the year that it was published. If you want to see where the particular item actually lives in the library, you click here on Item Location, and it takes you to this search screen. Now, under the heading Location, it rather unhelpfully says On the Shelf. If you actually want to see where the item is, you cast your eyes to the left, and under the heading Lincoln's Inn, it will give you the shelf mark. Now, I want to interrupt myself here because over the summer, we moved approximately about 90% of the library stock on the main floor of the library, and we're still catching up with all the shelf mark changes. So for the time being, there could be some old shelf marks that you're going to come across, but hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks, all of those will be taken care of and they will be up-to-date shelf marks. Old editions are primarily kept in the lower gallery of the library, so that's 1 level up from the main floor, and they are alphabetical by author as well. So that's if you're doing a search on something you already know the title of. If you want to do a more general search, well, this is when you use your drop-down menus there on the left. So if you want to do a general search, for example, of tort law textbooks, you choose the subject field, type in tort, and if you wanted to choose a different jurisdiction, for example, again, choose a drop-down menu, choose subject again, and type in your jurisdiction. So in this case, New Zealand. If you want to make it even more specific, at the bottom there's more drop-down menus. So under type, from there you could actually choose latest edition held, for example, if you wanted the latest edition of a tort law book in New Zealand. But that's also useful if you wanted to search legislation in a different jurisdiction. So New Zealand, and then under type you can choose legislation or law reports, etc. On the main floor of the library, there are 9 PCs, which are all equipped with a home page, which gives you links to the subscription databases that we subscribe to. And we subscribe to all the big hitters that you would expect. So Westlaw, Lexis, Justice, Hein Online, etc. We won't have time this evening. We have an extensive list of subscription databases, so we won't have a time to go into all of them this evening. And we are primarily going to be talking about Lexis and Westlaw, as those are the most heavily used. But I did just want to remind you that there are other databases with very useful content. Now, Mark is going to be looking at case law and legislation online this evening. But I'm going to start with just a very simple little introduction and mention a couple of special features here. Okay, we'll start with Lexis Library. Now, you're all probably aware of Lexis, or you've used Lexis and Westlaw already, so you kind of know what to expect when you come across using them in the library. Now, the main parts of the database are there at the top. The interesting thing about these databases is they're massive. They're just absolutely huge, but they're also very expensive. So we do not subscribe to every last part of the database. What we do subscribe to on Lexis is we have the Commonwealth collection. The problem is it's not very obvious how you get to it from the main search screen. So what you do, if you do want to search any of the Commonwealth material, is you go here to the right-hand side to Sources. And from there, you'll get a link to international content, which will bring you to this page. And from there, you can actually search the different Commonwealth countries. Moving on to Westlaw, it's a similar thing with the main parts of the database across the top. I will talk about the Legal Journals Index on Westlaw, which is a very useful source on Westlaw. But now I just wanted to mention the EU of material that's available on Westlaw. It's available here on the main search screen. You can search for EU cases, legislation, treaties, etc., based on either the basic search screen or on the advanced search. Just to say, the information here is freely available on the EURLEX site, which is the official website for the European Union. And like I said, that is a free website. But I find the search interface on EURLEX is a little bit clunky. And also it seems to me, and I know this is wrong, but it seems to me they seem to change their interface quite regularly. So if I have any EU material that I want to look up, I tend to go to Westlaw because they have a more sophisticated, user-friendly search interface. But that information is available free on the EURLEX website. As you all probably know from searching Google, that there is a wide variety of free sources of legal information out there of varying degrees of reliability and authenticity. However, I did want to mention a couple of free resources here. The first one I want to mention is right in the middle of the slide. It's Worldly. Now, some of you have probably already used Bailey, which is the British and Irish Legal Information Institute. Well, Worldly is the gateway site to all of the legal information institutes out there. So in addition to Bailey, there's Austly for Australian, Hong Kongly for Hong Kong, Commonly for Commonwealth, etc. It's a very useful free source for judgments and recent legislation. And like I said, from there, you can actually drill down to other jurisdictions that are available. The other free source that I wanted to mention is the one on the right-hand side of this slide, accesstolaw.com. This is another gateway site that's run by the staff at Inner Temple Library. The staff select and annotate 1,300 UK, Commonwealth, and worldwide legal websites that can be browsed either by jurisdiction or by subject. They're all free resources, and best of all, the staff at Inner Temple update Access to Law quarterly, so you're very rarely going to run across any broken links, which is really useful. There's a couple of other free websites that I've put on this slide. So there's gov.uk, which we're probably all quite familiar with now, legislation.gov, parliament.uk, and also a very useful one is the Cardiff Index to legal abbreviations. So if you just type legal abbreviations into Google, this will probably be the top results. So anytime you come across an acronym that you don't know, have a look at the legal abbreviation site, type in your acronym, and it will translate it for you there. Okay, starting your research. Now, there are many different ways of doing legal research. There's no one right way, there's no one wrong way. My aim is to just give you some tips and guidance on how to do your research most efficiently. Basically, the point of legal research is to conduct a persuasive argument on a point of law. You want to make sure your research is done thoroughly and proficiently. There have been a couple of cases in the last 20 years where counsel has been rebuked for poor legal research, so you do want to make sure you're organized. So for example, you don't want to be looking at out-of-date regulations on an unknown website, and you do want to make sure that you are researching your case law sufficiently. So the place to start is to understand the legal context of your problem. If you understand the legal context of your problem and the general principles of the laws from the beginning, then it will make it much easier to find relevant primary sources such as cases and legislation to support your argument. I suggest that in order to do this, the best place to start is to use secondary sources because it is often more productive to begin your research with sources such as textbooks, legal encyclopedias, or journal articles, because if you are not familiar with a particular area of law, it's very easy to make a mistake or go off on a tangent if you dive straight into the databases looking up case law or legislation. If you start with a good secondary source, it will give you the benefit of a legal expert's analysis of the law and give you a perspective on how your particular issue fits into the broader legal context. In addition, secondary sources are a good starting point on the road toward finding on-point primary authority, and because they will provide the leading cases in a particular area and a good enough description to decide if that case is applicable to your situation. Now, make sure you still research the case law on your own. Don't rely on what the textbook tells you. Make sure you do the research to make sure it is applicable to your situation. So if you don't know the general area of the law, I suggest you start with a legal encyclopedia. And by legal encyclopedias, I'm really talking about Halsbury's Laws of England. This is an authoritative encyclopedia of the law, which provides a complete narrative statement of law in England and Wales, and it draws on authorities such as acts, SIs, case law, and EU law. When you are looking at Halsbury's Laws of England, it's a multi-volume work. The temptation is to dive straight into the volume with your particular subject area on the spine. But when you want to use Halsbury's Laws most efficiently, you really want to start with the 3-volume index. First of all, because your area, subject area, might go over several volumes. And also, the index volume in hard copy, you have the advantage of using the controlled vocabulary. Now on this slide, I wanted to compare the hard copy index on the left with doing the search on Lexis. Now a lot of you probably already know that Halsbury's Laws is available under the commentary tab on Lexis. But if you're just dive straight into Lexis, you have no kind of roadmap which a hard copy index will provide for you. So on the left here, we have the law of bees. In the hard copy index, it lays out a very clear hierarchical order of the law with the main headings, subheadings, sub-subheadings, so you can see exactly where you are in the different areas of the law. When you just dive straight into the electronic source, you don't have that roadmap which is provided with the controlled vocabulary in the index. So I do suggest that you start with the hard copy source of Halsbury's Laws when you're starting your research. Also remember textbooks. They're a great secondary source because they again have the hard copy index, which gives you the roadmap to the law. Not all textbooks are alike though. If you don't know anything about the subject, I suggest you start with a general or a student textbook. If you do know a little bit of something about the subject, you can then use the big practitioner's text. So these are titles such as Chitty on Contracts, Snell's Equity, Phipson, etc. Another very useful secondary source that a lot of people forget, which I very briefly mentioned before, are journal articles. Journals are very valuable for catching current awareness and for catching recent developments since the last update to a textbook. And they may be the only source for information on topics which are barely covered in the textbooks, or they may provide a depth of analysis for which there's not space in the textbooks. Now this, I mentioned before when I was talking about Westlaw, it's the Legal Journals Index on Westlaw, which is where you really want to start looking at for journal articles. Westlaw has the abstracts or summaries of most UK law journal articles from 1986 to date, as well as the full text of many articles. Where the journal articles are only available as summaries though, the print version may be available either in our library or in one of the other in-library catalogs, or in one of the other in-libraries, so you can search our library catalogs online. Though I do want to say, if you are searching for journal articles and you can only come across an abstract, sometimes the abstract is enough information for you. So this is the general search screen here on Westlaw for doing journal search. If you are doing a search, for example, on adverse possession, type it in there to the subject field, and you get a results list that looks like this. If the full text is available, you'll get a link to it, or you will get a link to an abstract. If you look at the abstract, you will get a summary of the article, but it will also provide you with the primary sources, so any cases cited, any legislation cited, and that may be enough information for you to then go on and research your cases. If you want more information from a results list, they have this handy thing on the right-hand side where there's 3 bars. You can click on the drop-down menu. You can choose most detail, and what that will do is it will expand each of your results on your results list, so you can actually just scan down your results list to see if any of those journal articles are applicable to your situation. When you are starting your search of electronic sources, or in fact, if you're starting your search of hard copy indexes, you want to be thinking about keywords. You want to be thinking about broader terms, narrower terms, related terms. If you are searching in a textbook, or if you were searching on an electronic database and you're coming across, you're not getting very many results, or you're struggling to find what you're looking for in your textbook, Think about synonyms. This is where legal dictionaries can really be very helpful. Legal dictionaries such as Stroud's Judicial Dictionary, Words and Phrases Legally Defined. If you are not coming up with enough results, have a look at a legal dictionary for some synonyms and then do your search again. That may actually provide you with far more results. For example, on our library catalog, we do not use the term land law. We prefer the term real property. So that's an example of when you are searching electronic databases, you're not finding very much, have a look at some legal dictionaries for some synonyms. Another source for looking at synonyms and narrower terms and broader terms, related terms, is the index volumes to Halsbury's Laws. Broader terms are needed when your subject area is very, very specialized. You will not necessarily find textbooks on that particular area, but you may need to look into a textbook that's on a broader subject area and then look at the index to see if your specialist area is covered in that textbook. When it comes to searching the databases and you start off doing your search and you're looking at a broad search or a wide search, there's some tips that you want to use. I just want to say, I've stopped myself here again, that this screen, this information will be available in the handout that will be sent to you, so you don't need to sort of furiously write down these tips, but I'll just go through them with you now. So for a broad search, you want to be thinking about the connecting word or. So a search for building or construction will give you a results list with either of those words. You can use a truncation symbol such as this exclamation point. Put the exclamation point to the root of the word and it will find all forms of that word. So fraud exclamation point will find fraud, frauds, fraudulent, fraudulently, etc. For a broad search, you want to be thinking here about keywords rather than exact phrases. So then moving on then, when you want to narrow your search, you're now going to be using the connecting word and. So tenant and option and terminate and lease will give you a results list with all of those words in it. You want to now start thinking about phrases rather than just keywords. When you are searching for phrases on Westlaw, you need to use quotation marks around your phrase. You do not need to use quotation marks around Lexis. Again, the variations on search techniques that vary between the databases, this information will be in the handout that will be coming to you. You also can use word proximity operators, and this is very useful. So covenant W/5 trade will find you covenant within 5 words of trade. W/S trade will find covenant within the same sentence as trade. W/P will find covenant within the same paragraph as trade. Again, these word proximity operators slightly different between the databases, but the information will be in your handout. Now, this is my last tip for you before I hand over to Mark. And I know it sounds like common sense, but I really want to emphasize it. Make sure you keep notes so you don't repeat yourself. Make sure you keep notes in case you are interrupted while you are doing your research. You want to be aware of the steps that you've already taken so you do not have to start over again from scratch. You want to make sure you know the parts of the database or the parts of the book that you looked at so you do not need to do your research over an unnecessary number of times. So for printed sources, you want to make a note of the author, the title, the publisher, the edition, the date of the publication, and any parts of the book that you consulted, any keywords you used with the index, any paragraphs or supplements that you looked at. For electronic sources, you need the name of the database, the limitations of coverage of the database, the specific source in the database you looked at, the search terms you used, and most importantly for electronic sources, you want to look at the date in which you did the search because the electronic sources are updated all the time. Okay, I will now hand over to Mark, who will take you through the second half.
Okay, thank you very much, Carolyn, and thank you to everybody else who's attending this evening. So Carolyn's taken you through some general research tips. I'm going to go through a few more specifics regarding case law and legislation, primarily just as a heads up as to sort of what sort of things they are, what sort of resources you have access to in the library, and how you might navigate them in the sort of initial assessment, starting with case law. So the first thing you need to be aware of with regards to case law is that there's absolutely gazillions of cases out there, which some of which might be relevant, most of which won't be relevant, and making that initial assessment of what you need to pay attention to is often quite difficult. So just to reiterate a few things which Carolyn mentioned in her part of the session, please do start with secondary sources to look for the list of prominent and relevant cases regarding particular topics. So rather than sort of trying to reinvent the wheel every single time and sort of working out what you need to look at, assume that some of the editors of the major textbooks will have done this initial work for you and look to their work just to begin with. As with all of the secondary sources, don't just rely upon their work as absolute fact. So if a textbook suggests a particular case is of relevance to you, please do look at the actual case itself just to double check it and to see how it's been treated in subsequent cases, and also use it as a sort of launch pad for subsequent research as well. But it should certainly give you the leading cases. When you do then look at the databases to do this, that's when Carolyn's research tips will come into their own, and you can actually start to use clever searches to actually sort of find some more specific cases. If you do identify a case which is of potential relevance to you and you deem it, obviously at the moment you're students, but when you become barristers and you might want to present this information in court, you do need to bear in mind that you can't just give any old version of the case to court. You do need to use particular versions of them. There was a practice direction released a few years ago which sets out specifically which versions of the cases you do need to use. So if it's been reported, you have to use a reported version, and which report you use is also specified. So this hierarchy is in your handouts, and it's worth familiarizing yourself with how it works. So at the top of the tree, we've got the ICLR series, so the law reports as they're known. So we've got the appeal cases, the Queen's Bench, Chancery, and Family. If the case which you're interested in is reported in one of these particular law report series, that is the version you would have to use when bringing it into court. And as students, it's definitely worthwhile getting into that mindset now. Beneath the sort of the top hierarchy, you've got the weekly law reports and the All Englands. They're roughly equivalent. Beneath the sort of the top of the tree, we've got various specialist series, which are deemed to be sort of equally sort of authoritative because they contain a head note. They include the keywords. They sort of check their references. The people who do the actual law reporting are often people who will hold a senior course qualification. So, for example, the law reports might pick up on quite a few family cases, but the huge series of law reports which we call the family law reports will obviously pick up on a huge range more. So any cases relevant to your particular research might be picked up in those, and they are deemed very authoritative because of the way in which they produce their law reports. And likewise, other things such as the wills and trusts law reports, etc. Beneath these series of authoritative law reports, we have other things which are maybe more digesty, such as the Estates Gazette, etc. And then finally, we have the official transcript. So if the case which you're interested in only appears in the transcript, then by all means do use the transcript. Do try to use a reported version if possible. But if all there is a transcript, try to use it in conjunction with sort of a digest as well, just to give it a bit more context. Also try to use the head note. So one of the benefits of the Better Law Report series is the fact that they will provide you at the beginning of the law report a head note, which will give you sort of a summary of what the case is regarding, and also it should identify the principle of law established by the case as well. Again, as with all of these things, don't just rely upon the head note to be true. The law itself is contained within the judgment, so that is what you would need to check yourself. You are the person who would have to stand by the sort of using the case when you do need to use the case. But the head note should give you an indication, certainly, especially when you're sort of assessing perhaps sort of 50, 60 potentially relevant cases. The head note is a good starting point. I mentioned the fact that you can't just present the case to court in any particular format you want. The other thing which you need to bear in mind is the fact you can't just print off from the database a particular version. So if a law report appears on a database in HTML, you can't just print that version off. you have to look for a PDF copy of it, because the judges like it to look like it comes from a book. It needs a certain authority to it. So if it's not in a PDF version, you do need to go to the hard copy and photocopy it. But luckily for you, at Lincoln's Inn and the other inn libraries as well, we have huge collections of hard copy material. So do remember that online is very, very useful, but not everything is online, and what is online is not often in the format you will need when you come to present this in court. So the hard copy resources do remain essential. And also, please do remember that the databases are rivals as well. So that even though they may be your friends and sort of are there for your benefit, they are sort of the products of rival publishers. So Westlaw is a product of Sweet and Maxwell. Lexis is a product of LexisNexis Butterworths. So they don't necessarily sort of work together. So you won't find Sweet and Maxwell material on Lexis, and you won't find Butterworth stuff on Westlaw. So if you do just sort of restrict yourself to one particular database because you like the interface, whatever it might be, you do, as a matter of course, restrict the sort of resources which you have available to you. So please do familiarise yourself with all of the resources which you have at your disposal. Obviously, Westlaw and Lexis are the big two, but as Carolyn mentioned, we have access to a huge range of other things in the library as well. But rivals though they may be, they are still extraordinarily powerful, and also variously easy to navigate as well. So do familiarise yourself with how they work. As Carolyn alluded to, at the top of each sort of database, we have a sort of list of various modules, so cases, legislation, journals, etc. The first thing to bear in mind is when you do know you're searching for cases, for example, please do go into the cases tab. It sounds obvious, but you get much better search functionality when you're using the cases module rather than the home screen. So say you've done your initial researches and you think that this case might be of relevance to you. So ocean bulk shipping and trading. So you start typing it in, gives you your predictions, and then Westlaw very nicely gives you your search results grouped together by the hearing. So at the top, you got Supreme Court, then the Court of Appeal, and then at the bottom, you got the Queen's Bench Division. And then you got the various subjects and keywords, so you can do an initial assessment as to whether or not it's actually sort of keyed into what you're researching. And then the list of places where it's been reported. So I mentioned the hierarchy earlier on. So it is worth familiarizing yourself with that and bearing it in mind. But the databases, both Westlaw and Lexis, should list the various places that a case has been reported in order of the hierarchy. So to take as an example, the top one, the Supreme Court judgment, it starts with the case analysis and then something which looks like a law report, but it's not. It's something called a neutral citation. So the top example is just the fact that in 2010, in the UK Supreme Court, this is case number 44. And it's just a unique identifier for this particular case. And then we have, following in sequence, the various places that this has been reported. So we've got the appeal cases, which is the ISLR, then the weekly law reports, All England's, etc. And it goes down in the hierarchy. Here we have the status indicators. So again, just to continue the theme of being a bit cautious with what secondary people sort of suggest to you, at the bottom it says negative judicial treatment, then negative judicial consideration, and then at the top the Supreme Court is positive judicial treatment. Obviously that indicates something, but what it indicates is not necessarily very clear, as I'll go on to show when I look at the same case within Lexis. So this might be a case which is of interest to you, but please do start with the case analysis rather than diving straight into a particular law report. So you go into the case analysis on Westlaw. Down the centre, you got the summary and the abstract. So again, you get a quick assessment as to what this case is relating to. And on the left-hand side, this is where you get all the sort of additional benefits of using a database. So all of the databases are very, very powerful repositories of information. But more than just being a repository, they sort of cross-link everything which they hold as well. So if there's any sort of other cases relating to this, so for example, in this one on the left-hand side, any sort of cases which this case cited, any subsequent cases which cite this particular case, any legislation which this cites, any book chapters which discuss it, any journal articles, etc., you'll find all of that sort of collated in one single location. So if this case is of particularly interest to you, you can use it to look for other related information just at a click of a mouse. So there we go. So having done all of that assessment, and you think it is a case which you want to pursue, on the right-hand side there, we've got all the places which has been reported, which, as I mentioned, would be in the list, the order of the hierarchy. And at the top, you've got the appeal cases with a PDF. So you go into it, at the top, you got the keywords, then the head note, and then following on from that, you'd find the judgment itself. And there's the PDF. As I mentioned, it's very, very worthwhile sort of learning to navigate all the databases you have at your disposal. So Westlaw offers certain services, Lexis offers other services, so please do familiarize yourself with both of them. In terms of navigating them, they're vaguely similar, but there are certain differences which is worth flagging up just initially. So again, with Lexis, start with the Cases tab to open up their sort of extended search functionality and search for the same case within the case name, exactly the same as we did on Westlaw. On Westlaw, when we did this search, we received 3 results. Doing exactly the same search on Lexis gives us 18 results. The reason for this is that Westlaw groups together all of the sort of different sort of points which they have relating to each judgment together in a single search result, whereas Lexis gives you a separate search result for every single sort of reported version or case analysis transcript which they have for that particular case, which can have its benefits in certain contexts, but if you're doing an initial assessment, it can be quite confusing. So if instead of searching for the cases in the case name, as you'd assume, try to do so in the case overview tab, which will again group the search hits together again by the court. So at the top, Supreme Court, Court of Appeal, and the commercial at the bottom. I mentioned when I was looking at the status indicators on Westlaw that they are useful, but you shouldn't rely upon them as sort of meaning too much, because on Lexis here you can see that sort of the commercial received positive, then the Court of Appeal received negative, and then the Supreme Court has received positive judicial treatment. Whereas Westlaw, for the exact same set of cases, had negative, then positive. So there's obviously a discrepancy there somewhere, and it can sort of be a bit confusing as to what that means. People often assume it means it's either good law or bad law, but all it means is it's received some form of negative or positive judicial treatment. You do have to go into the case itself and look to see what's actually been happened. The reasons for the discrepancies can vary. So, for example, any particular case might cover various points of the law, and whatever has received negative judicial treatment in subsequent cases might not be the point which you're interested in, or they might just be trying to express quite a complex judicial story in what is essentially just an emoji. So, for example, Westlaw might indicate the fact that the High Court decision has received negative judicial treatment because it was overturned by the Court of Appeal, whereas Lexis decided to revert that to positive because it might have been ratified by the Supreme Court. So they're just trying to sum up quite a complex story with a just colourful little symbol. So you do always have to go into the case itself just to check what's happened to it. Don't just rely upon the status indicators. But after that point, you go into the case analysis and it's much the same. So you have the list of places which has been reported in order of the hierarchy, the various catchwords, digests, abstracts, and links to other relevant information as well. Okay, so moving on to legislation now. The first question you have to ask yourself is, do you need it in the original enacted version, or do you want it as amended? If you want it the original sort of enacted version of the legislation, you have various resources available to you within Lincoln's Inn. So we have sort of the Queen's printed copy, which is the sort of the official printed copy of the Act. We have versions of these going back to 1235. And it's worth familiarising yourself with the sort of the layout of the Act, so that when you do come to use it in your practice, you're not flummoxed by the fact that they ask for a section or a schedule or whatever it might be. Just have an initial sort of familiarity with what Acts look like. And since 1999, all of the public general acts have been accompanied by explanatory notes as well. These tend to be written by the government department responsible for the subject matter of the act. And although they're not necessarily sort of the law itself, they are a guide to the particular piece of legislation. So the background to the act, why the act was deemed necessary, how the act is intending to go about doing what it intends to do. So if you're looking at an act for the first time, or if you just want sort of a bit more information about the act, this is a very good place to start. Another good place to start is another hard copy series we hold in the library called Current Law Statutes. Since 1950, these have been called Current Law Statutes Annotated because, as the name suggests, they can include annotations. So you'll find a printed copy of the Act as it was enacted, and then you'll find various annotations listed beneath it. So you'll find any references to any sort of Hansard debates and other relevant reports which went into the formation of the Act. You get sort of general notes regarding the background to the area of the law, the background to the Act, how it was sort of became the act it became. And then as you sort of go through the particular act, all the relevant sections where that information sort of exists, you should find other annotations as well. So if you are interested in finding out why an act became the act it did, the Current Law Statutes Annotated is a very good place to begin. In terms of the databases we have access to in the library, the best one is Justice. So again, this is a subscription database which you can access in the library, and they have PDFs of the enacted versions of the Act. Again, going back to 1235, they do take their information from statutes at large. So you need to sort of double check the older ones that they're not sort of abbreviated versions of them. But we should have hard copies of them, which we can double check for you should you ever wish to do so. But you will find PDFs on there. They do list the sort of any sort of subsequent pieces of legislation which amend it, but they don't incorporate them into the body of the Act. But if you do want enacted legislation, this is the best database to use. However, Justice is a paid-for subscription database, which you can only use when you're in the library. If, for whatever reason, you can't access Justice, but you do want enacted versions of the legislation, then legislation.gov.uk, which Carolyn mentioned earlier on, is an excellent website. It's free and it's operated by the National Archives. And since the sort of the late 80s onwards, they're very, very sort of comprehensive in terms of the coverage of public general acts. You'll find a PDF on there as well. I mean, it's very, very easy to navigate. So if you can't access Justice, please do check legislation.gov.uk. They're very good from the 80s onwards, but they do have material going back further as well. So it's always worth having a look. You can find amended legislation on here as well, which is what it defaults to under what version. But please do bear in mind that they don't necessarily always sort of update things immediately. They do have a sort of a several months sort of window which they allow themselves to update it because they don't have the sort of commercial power of the major databases. But they're very, very quick regardless. But they do have a status bar at the top which will indicate the last point to which they were updated. So again, even for updated legislation, it's a very, very good resource, and it's free. But if you do want updated legislation, the best resources to use are the following. So in terms of hard copy resources, which we have in the library, then the best one is Halsbury Statutes. This is a commercial series, which and it covers a lot of volumes. It takes up more than an entire bay in the library. And how they work is that they'll publish a volume on particular legal subjects, and then within that volume they'll publish a version of that statute, of the various statutes relating to that particular area of the law, and then they update that using various sort of cumulative supplements and loose leaf services, etc. So if you do like to use hard copy resources, and a lot of people do for various reasons, this is the best one to use. And they also have the added benefit of including annotations as well. So they'll include links to other relevant acts, SIs, case law, judicial definitions, etc. So it's a very good resource you can use in the library for amended legislation. But for the most part, if you're looking for up-to-date legislation, you're probably going to be using the databases. So Lexis and Westlaw are the ones to go to for amended legislation. Lexis sort of came into force, came into being late in the 90s, and it's a very, very easy to navigate website. So again, start with the legislation tab because that's what you're specifically looking for, and you get much more fine-grained search functionality. So pop in whatever act you're searching for, so Freedom of Information Act 2000, for example. On Lexis, you do have to specify if you're searching for an act or an SI. You don't have to do so on Westlaw, but it's worth bearing in mind which box you've ticked in earlier researches because it does remember your settings. And then whichever provision number, so if you're searching for a particular section or a schedule, you can pop that number in there. And this is how Lexis sets out their sort of material. It's very sort of straightforward. So down the center, you've got a list of all the various sections, etc. At the top, you've got the stop press box. So this is the equivalent of the function I mentioned on legislation.gov.uk, which will flag up any amendments which are pending, anything which you need to be aware of. So things which they might not necessarily have incorporated or which might be coming to a force soon. So if you're intending to use this legislation soon, please do check the stop press function just to ensure there's nothing sort of pending which might affect what you intend to use it for. And then to the side, we've got the status indicator, which, as this is for the entirety of the Act, it just means it's mixed, which you might expect because certain sections are in force, certain sections aren't, etc. And then on the right-hand side here in the Find Out More box, this is the equivalent to what I was referring to before. So the databases have a huge amount of information on them, and what they do is sort of cross-reference everything as well. So if you're interested in doing research about this piece of legislation, the Find Out More box will give you links to other sort of book chapters, any cases which cite this particular piece of legislation, any journal articles. Importantly, if you're interested in any SIs which should be made under this Act, this is where you can find that information as well. And then you'll see there as well Halsbury's annotations. So because Lexis publish, Lexis Butterworth publish Halsbury statutes, they can include the Halsbury's annotations in their database as well. And when you go into a particular section, so section 10, all of that sort of information now pertains only to section 10. So the stop press, the status indicator, and everything in the Find Out More box, so any relevant cases, etc., that would only relate to section 10 now. On Westlaw, it's much the same. They came to being slightly early in the 90s. But in terms of navigating the material which they have on there for up-to-date legislation, it's very simple to do so. So again, start with the legislation tab, pop in the same information which we did before for Lexis. And then down the center, we have all of the various sections with their status indicators highlighted. And then on the left-hand side, this is where you'd find all of the sort of additional information. So links to any SIs, case law, journal articles, book chapters, etc. You'd find that in the table of contents this time. And again, go into a relevant section, and all of that information there pertains only to section 10. And what Westlaw does, which is quite neat, is that you can compare versions of the sections as well quite nicely. So as you can see on the right-hand side there, this is the law in force and it's version 5. There's been 4 versions previous to this one. And if you wanted to compare the various versions, you can just click on the 2 which you want to compare, or you can compare all 5. And it'll bring up a sort of grid explaining what's happened in between the various versions. So if you want to track changes to legislation, that's quite a sort of a fun function. And I mentioned that Lexis includes Halsbury's annotations. Obviously, you won't find Halsbury's annotations in Westlaw because of the publishing rights, etc. But they have their own equivalent called statutory annotations in this instance. And it includes much the same sort of information, so references to Hansard, other legislation, etc. So just quickly touch upon statutory instruments. These are subsidiary legislation made under powers created by the statutes. The vast majority of these aren't debated by Parliament. And whereas you might get, say, for example, 50, 60, 70 acts per year, you will get literally thousands of SIs every year. So they tend to be sort of smaller, but obviously extraordinarily important in terms of sort of fleshing out the body of the law itself. They're quite a simple thing to navigate. They just have the year and then whichever sequential number they've been tagged with. And they're also accompanied by explanatory notes as well. We hold them in the library in hard copy going back to 1890, when they were known as statutory rules and orders. In 1949, there was something published called the 1948 revision, which published all of the SIs which were enforced in the version they were enforced in 1948. Just as have access to this particular volume, and everything which had been published or passed subsequently. And you'll also find PDFs on there as well. Legislation.gov.uk, again, sort of similar sort of thing to the Public General Act. So you'll find that they're very, very good from the late 80s onwards, slightly patchy, going back further into history, but they do have a lot on there. And again, it's a very, very easy to navigate website. And I do tend to use that primarily to find SIs as well. So, okay, so touching upon historic law, the first thing to bear in mind if you do want to find out how the law stood at a particular point in the past is that it works much the same way for present law legal research. So do start with secondary sources, so old editions of textbooks. We have a huge collection of old editions of textbooks going back literally centuries. So should you want to know how the law stood in a particular point in time, there's a chance that we've got a textbook covering a related topic which is published sort of similar to the time which you're interested in. So if you want us to check our catalogue for old editions of textbooks sort of on the points of law which you're interested in, please do ask and we can help you to navigate the catalogue. It's quite often useful just to find out what the major textbooks are now and see how far they go back into past, because quite often they've been going for 100, 200 years themselves. In terms of sort of the legislation itself, obviously you could just use the Queen's Printer copy on the assumption that there's been no amendments made to it, but that never happens. There's always amendments made to legislation. So you do need to sort of look to one of the sort of amending services. So in terms of the hard copy things which we have access to, we have the Holsbury Statutes going back to the first edition in 1925. So if you want to find out how a piece of legislation looked like, at any point go back to 1925, you need to find the relevant volume which is published closest to the date in question and try and compare and contrast around it. Obviously that's quite tricky to do, so if you ever need to do that, please feel free to ask the library staff and we can go through it with you. But if you're interested in how sort of the law stood at any point from the 90s onwards, then the databases are extraordinarily helpful. And again, they're very easy to navigate. They work in much the same way as sort of just doing normal present-day legal research, but there's a couple of steps you need to take. So on Westlaw, for example, under the legislation tab, if you click on the More Options button at the bottom, you're given the option of the point in time box. So pop in the relevant date which you're interested in, and then after that you just do the search as normal. So search for the act in the section, and it will produce a version of the section as it stood at that particular point in time. For Lexis, it's vaguely similar. So again, start with the legislation tab, but you will notice that at the top of the screen it defaults to the current version. If you change that to historical version instead, you get a slightly truncated search screen, which includes the point in time box, as you found with Westlaw. So again, if you pop in the relevant date in question, and then do the search as we did before, you'll find the version of that particular section as it stood at that particular point in time. One final thing just to reference before we sort of wrap up regarding historic law is when you're looking at the databases, a piece of legislation on one of the databases, you might spot various sort of grammatic oddities. So you might see sort of ellipses strewn throughout the place, square brackets, things in italics, etc. They're not just there at random. The database is trying to tell you something. So for example, if you see an ellipsis on Lexis, it means that there's been some repealed text. If it's in if it's in italics, it's due to be replaced. If it's in square brackets, it's text that's been inserted, etc. So in your handouts, we've included these lists of what the databases are trying to tell you with these various grammatical quirks. But if you ever spot one of these things in a piece of legislation on a database, if you just scroll down to that particular section, it will flag up what has been happening to that piece of legislation. So what piece of legislation did what to it. Okay, so finally, just to remind you that even if you can't make it into the library for whatever reason, so you might be based away from London, or there are certain COVID travel restrictions which are sort of limiting your access, please do remember that we are still sort of working here on your behalf, and we are still sort of your librarians at your library. So if there's anything we can do to help you, please do get in touch. You can always give us a call, give us an email with whatever sort of research you're stuck with. If there's a sort of a source which you want to sort of help us to help you sort of to identify, please just get in touch with us. And also, obviously, with this sort of session, we can only sort of cover the basics as we're going through it, and just to highlight a few things which we can sort of do. But if you ever want bespoke training on anything, so if you want bespoke training on case law, legislation, if you want to go more depth in a particular database, by all means do get in touch and we can set something up with you. One of the few benefits of the lockdown is that we're slightly more au fait with online platforms, so we can do sort of social, Zoom training for you whenever you wish. Thank you very much. So Carolyn has been answering questions throughout my section, and if there's any other questions which you want to ask, please feel free to ask it now and we'll answer them if we can do.
Just to say, I just kind of wanted to reassure everyone that hopefully we're really keeping our fingers crossed that we'll be able to stay open during the lockdown. But if there are any changes to our opening hours, we will actually put that up on the opening hours page under the Library and Archives tab on the website and advertise that via social media. Also, just to say that someone's just asked about photocopying. Anything can be photocopied in the library at the moment. Right now, there is no charge for photocopying. I'm not sure when we're going to reintroduce charges, but for the time being, you can actually photocopy free of charge. So you do need to pay for printing. So if you want to print from any of the databases, you have to buy a card for 80 pence, and printing is then 5p per page. Say.
Okay. There's a question just came in about how do we get access to the databases? Do we need to sort of register? So if you can attend the library, you don't need to register. You can just sort of log in at the PCs we have in the center of the library. They're open access. You don't need to use any login details for the vast majority of the databases. There are certain specialist databases which we subscribe to, which have sort of more restricted access. So should you ever need to use one of those, please feel free to ask the library staff and we can log you into it. For the vast majority of the databases we subscribe to, you do have to be in the library to use them, just because of the terms of our subscription to the various databases. The one exception would be Bloomsbury Law Online, which we can sort of give access to remotely. So should you wish to gain access to that, please do feel free to get in touch with the library and we can set you up with that.
Also to say that our Lexis subscription has actually expanded recently, so we have some more sources that are available on Lexis. In particular, Atkins Court Forms is available, and Encyclopedia Forms and Precedents. Mark, is that right? They're both on Lexis?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so those you can use electronically now within the library as well.
There's a question regarding printing. We have sort of printing facilities in the library, so you would need to buy a photocopying card from us, which historically would have combined both photocopying and printing access rights. But as Carolyn mentioned, photocopying is currently free. Printing we've retained a cost for, but it's 5 pence per page, so it is sort of still quite cheap. But should you ever need to sort of register a card, just come to the library inquiry desk and we can set you up an account for that.
There is no dress code for the library. I mean, we do ask you to sort of keep your shoes on and to dress appropriately, but you do not need to wear sort of a suit or anything. Any kind of attire is fine. And you do see a little bit of everything in the library, but yes, we just ask you to be socially acceptable, but no, there is no dress code.
So there's a question about how quickly a law report's put online. It varies dramatically. It's entirely down to the publishers, essentially. In terms of getting transcripts, it's very, very quick normally. If you look on, there's a free website called Bailey, which Carolyn referenced in her part of the talk. they often get them up there within sort of a day or two. And so if you want a sort of a very recent case, obviously the transcript will be available quicker than a law report, because the law report has to do various things to it. It has to check it, it has to sort of add the keynotes, headwords, headnote, etc., and then actually put in a format to print it. So it can take a bit of a while to sort of come into print, and the equivalent of version online as well. But yeah, if you want to sort of get a very recent one, do check the transcripts on Bailey. In terms of what is the criteria for reporting on cases, again, that's an assessment which the sort of law reporters make. It's generally if they deem it sort of notable in some sense, if it sort of forms a sort of legal precedent of some kind, if it sort of discusses legal precedent in a sort of an important sense, then they will sort of report it. But there's no hard and fast rule, and the sort of the difference of law reports students will have their own criteria for what they deem reportable.
So we have a question here about elusive areas of law. Yes, please always contact the library if you have any questions. And basically, we don't interpret the law for you, but we can always tell you perhaps which sources are best to use. Again, how to use the different textbooks and the secondary sources that you might want to start with. But always come into the Inquiry desk or give us a call or send us an email, and we always we'll do our best to answer the question that you have. We also had somebody who asked about using the mobile in the library. We ask that you don't use your mobile in the library because it can be somewhat disruptive. So we do ask people if they just need to take a call to just step outside the library to take that call, if possible. Yeah.
There's a question regarding what restrictions are in place in terms of using the library. If you need to use a mask and stuff, you don't at the moment need to use a mask to use the library. Obviously, things might change with the regulations changing, etc. But as things stand at the moment, you don't need to use a mask. If you're more comfortable in it, as you're walking around the library, you're of course welcome to do so. The library is quite a spacious place, so we've not had any issues in terms of social distancing. You don't need to register in advance to use the library. There are certain libraries which are requesting that you do so. For example, in a Temple library, we're asking that you register in advance before you attend. So if you do want to use a different library, please do check their website just to check their current regulations, because things are changing so quickly that what I tell you now might not be relevant in 2 hours' time. So if you intend to use a library, do check their website. But at the moment, we don't require you to register in advance. What we do require is that when you do turn up to the library, that you register at the door. So there should always be a warden on duty who will take your registration and ask you to sanitize your hands as well. We have sort of hand wipes throughout the library, and there's hand sanitizers at the desk as well. And then throughout the day, there's a couple of cleaners who sort of do the rounds, who sort of clean all the surfaces, clean all the computers, clean all the doors and stuff. So we're doing all we can to stay on top of it, but you certainly don't need to sort of book a place in advance.
And following on from that, no, you don't need identification to enter the library. As Mark says, you just sign in when you come in. We don't have borrowing for students. Borrowing is very, very restricted for anyone, really. So we are a reference library, so the books are the material is meant to be used in the library. We normally don't ask for identification. If occasionally we'll ask which inn you're a member of. If you have any further questions, we might look you up on we have a database we can look you up on, but we don't ask you to bring in an identification card or anything like that.
There's a question regarding who designed the library, because it's a remarkable room. I mean, I can agree with you that it is a remarkable space. It's a really wonderful place to study in. So if you can attend it, it's definitely worth doing so. In terms of who designed it, I do know, and it's gone out of my head.
It's completely gone out of my head as well. I've heard this, but it's been a long time and I can't recall the name.
Yeah, but yeah. Certainly, I'm guessing if we can find that afterwards. And so if you want to send us an email, we can certainly let you know.
Mm-hmm. I just have the name G.F. Watts because he did the mural in the Great Hall, but he's not in the library. Can you bring guests into the library? So you can certainly bring someone in to show them around, but people who are not members are not meant to be using the library as such. But certainly if you want to bring your parents or friends just to show them the library, we do let people do that. But no, people who are not members are not meant to be in the library using the facilities, especially now where we're trying to be a little bit careful in terms of social distancing and things. We ask you not to bring your friends in to use the library, but you can certainly walk in with them and show them so that they can see it.
Yeah. I think it might be in Hardwick. That's sort of popped up in my mind. I think please do not quote me on that fact, but I think it was Hardwick who designed the library and the entire sort of Treasury building. But yeah, in terms of other questions, what was this? So, can you use the other in libraries? So yeah, so as a member of Lincoln's Inn, you're welcome to use any of the other in libraries. So there's no registration required. You automatically have access rights to all of the other in libraries.
And the library is open. The library is located at one end of the Great Hall complex. So where the hall is and where the members' common room is, we're at the opposite end of the building, and the entrance is up the main staircase there. It's a little bit hard to see though, as it is sort of, there's a lot of scaffolding and things around, but it is the main staircase. And in terms of floors, we have the main floor of the library and the upper gallery and the lower gallery. And then we also have the cellar. At the moment, the cellar is still closed for users because we're still in the process of moving a lot of material and unloading boxes of books. Books were boxed up for months when the library was closed, and then with the lockdown and things. So the cellar's still closed. So essentially the library has 3 floors in the main building and then a cellar. And it is Hardwick. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, there's been a couple of very kind people who've posted in the questions to say that it was Hardwick. And somebody who even knew that it was Philip Hardwick. So well done you. Thank you very much. There was another question as well asking about, so do library materials have any sort of number of specific borrowing? I'm not too sure what you mean, but if you mean is a restriction in terms of how much you can copy, then it's not like we don't have our own restrictions in that sense, but we do have to sort of stick to the copyright regulations. So if it's sort of judicial proceedings, you have more sort of remit to do so, but otherwise if it's for private study, then you do have to stick to the usual sort of 10%, one chapter, etc., whatever it might be.
And yes, you do have access to the library for your whole life, as long as you're not kicked out of the inn for any reason. Once you're a member for life, so you can always use the library now and after you're called as well, or as a student member for life. Yeah. So
there's no more questions.
There seems to be all our, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
So hopefully we've answered all your questions tonight. As Mark said, if you do want any personal training, one-to-one training, we're doing really well with these Zoom trainings. So if there's anything that you want training on, just contact the library. The general library email is just simply library@lincolnsinn.org.uk, and we can organize any one-to-one training there if you want. I think that's all of the questions that we have.
Yeah, thank you very much for everybody who's attended.
Yes.
And thank you to the education team for setting it up as well. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for looking after us so well to the education. Yes, thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Hi there.
Hi,
How
Roni.
did you enjoy that, Ellie?
I did. It was very informative, thank you. It's really whetted my appetite. So when it seems appropriate, I'm hoping I may come